Hello, my name is Keith. I am the lead and teaching pastor here at Grassroots Church. A really warm welcome to you this morning, especially if you're new to church, if this is the first time for you to be tuning into Grassroots. I'm glad you're here. Thanks so much for joining in. I hope you have a good experience on this first day of what is for Christians our most holy week. The last few weeks I've been talking about church with the metaphor of the church in pieces. I've been seeing church a little bit like a potted plant in a clay pot that has been rumbled off its shelf and has hit the floor, pieces shattered, uh, dust and dirt everywhere strewn across the floor, and roots laid bare. The church is still alive, very much alive, but the environment that it has lived in has been a little cracked, a little shattered. And so basically what I'm doing is picking up piece by piece, showing us a little bit of what makes up the church in this time, because the church needs tending to. The church needs to be put back together, and it does so in a time where we are no longer able to use one of the most crucial pieces of the puzzle, which is our Sunday morning worship. And so I invite you, friends, to continue to think about what really makes up church. What is church about, and how are we going to put it back together to contain and to care for and to put back the environment that the church grows best in? The past couple of weeks I've been talking about one piece. I've picked up one shard and said, if we can't have Sunday mornings, then what's the next most important piece of the puzzle? And I've been inviting us to think about the piece of gathering together in small groupings of people for intentional spiritual conversations, for times of encouragement and challenge and comfort as we open the scriptures together and to share with one another what the Lord is inspiring on our hearts. So this week I'm going to do a second piece. I'm going to pick up another piece, which is Holy Week, the week that Christians celebrate Good Friday and Easter. It's the week that time shifts a little bit. Our sense of time changes. We enter back into the story of the last week of Jesus' life as if we were really living within the story ourselves. We become characters in the last week of Jesus during this time, where we relive Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, riding on a colt, riding on a donkey. According to the Synoptic Gospels, according to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it is 5 days before the Passover festival. It's sometime during the day on the Sunday before Good Friday. It's 5 days before all the rides show up at the Murillo Fair, and everyone is there setting up their tents, getting themselves ready. And Mark tells us that as they approached Jerusalem, as they came to Bethpage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples forward, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and just as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you doing this?' say, 'The Lord needs it, and will send it back to you.'" So the festival preparations are underway, and Jesus has prearranged in a city or in a little village that's surrounding Jerusalem. He's prearranged to find a colt there that he wants to ride into Jerusalem on. And he's also prearranged a code word or a code sentence with some of his loyal followers who live around Jerusalem, and for his disciples so they can find one another. And by doing this, Jesus is about to enact an embodied experience for his disciples and put his actions within the storyline of Israel. How? 3 ways. First, by choosing to make his final stand on Passover, which is a festival of remembrance. Second, he's going to stir up another memory in Israel's mind by evoking a memory of Jewish coronations. Third, by presenting himself as Passover lamb. And Jesus would use all 3 of these ways to draw his followers and all who were in Jerusalem really during that time into the story of God, with Jesus set as its now central character. So first it was Passover. It was one of 3 times a year where Jewish families would travel up to the mountains in Jerusalem. They would camp around all over the place and worship God. I mentioned that this was maybe like the Murillo Fair, but actually this is probably more like a powwow, on Mount McKay, if you've ever been to one. Families camped around, there's smoke, symbols, worship. Except for this was the Jewish God. And the Jewish God told their people to practice Passover every year on the evening on twilight on the 15th of their first month of Eve. And he did so for a very specific reason, to help them remember the story, that he rescued them after 430 years of life in Egypt, many of those spent in agonizing slavery. And he instituted this festival of remembrance, which Jews have kept now for 3,000 years to help them remain faithful to God, no matter what could happen. It's very difficult, actually, to stay faithful to God, to an unseen creator, when all the world around us is vying with stories for our allegiance. I don't know about you, but especially in times like this, I can be so disoriented and swirled around in circles and be really susceptible to the many stories that are after my heart. I'm going to read a little bit of a excerpt from one of my favorite books called Desiring the Kingdom by James K. Smith. Here's how he puts it. I see these images on a billboard or a moving in a sitcom, and while never articulated, an implicit recognition seeps into my unconscious. Huh? We almost say to ourselves. Everything seems to work out for these people. They seem to enjoy the good life. Their life is not without its drama and struggles, but they seem to be enjoying family and friends who help them overcome adversity. And they sure have nice accessories to go with all that. Maybe at least part of the reason they're happy is because of what surrounds them. That sitcom dad has one of those mammoth chrome barbecues that could grill an entire side of beef in one go. Who wouldn't be happier with something like that? That commercial kid has the latest mobile PDA that makes texting a cinch. Who wouldn't be happier if that was easy to stay in touch with your friends? That billboard mom has it all together. Her kids are smiling and seem remarkably obedient. She's coiffed and slim and seems so carefree. Surely that new minivan with the DVD player and 14 cup holders must have something to do with it, and so on. It's very difficult to stay faithful to God. One of the lines of our great hymn tradition puts it this way: prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Israel was a group of people prone to leave the God they love. If you don't believe me, you can read the latter half of the Old Testament, or much of the Old Testament, really. But the people of God of all times are prone to leave the God we love. It's true of all of us. And there are some great saints who have reached a position in their life where they are not prone to leave God or to wander from God. But those are few and far between, and we can all aspire to that. But most of us, if we feel like we've arrived at some sort of unquestioned allegiance to God, we really need to check ourselves. And God knows this about us. God knows that we are prone to wander. And so what does he do? Does he come in every year and give us a standardized test? Does he show up once a year to the mountains of Jerusalem and give them a lecture? No, he institutes a rhythm, a yearly festival for them to remember the God they loved, a way to get them immersed in the story. And this is the time that Jesus chose, when they were in this kind of mode, to come in and to fill the story of God in with his presence, with something unexpected and something very new. So being the church today involves us entering into spaces where we are immersed into the story of God. Mark goes on. When they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks over it, he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, while others spread branches they had cut in the fields. Those who went ahead and those who followed shouted, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest heaven. What's going on here? By coming in on a donkey, Jesus is calling forth the memory in the people of some of the great coronations of Israel's kings long ago, something that they usually didn't think about during the Passover time. So when David's son Solomon was anointed king, he came in to Jerusalem on a donkey, riding on a donkey. Or a lesser known king named Jehu, during his coronation, there were cloaks put under his feet to recognize his royalty. Or 140 years before Jesus, the Jewish people had already been overtaken by a pagan overlord. And very briefly, they gained their independence with Simon Maccabeus being crowned and ushered in as the new king of Israel. And he did so with palm branches waving. So there's a memory of this kind of coronation, and a very recent one in the course of time. It would be like a group of people following a leader coming into Washington, D.C. today, bringing with them and flying Confederate flags. Jesus was doing something very recognizable as a political move to become ruler of the city and the nation. He's putting himself into the storyline of kings riding on this donkey. So the church's role, if we do this correctly, if we follow Jesus well, is not only to immerse ourselves and others into the storyline of God, but to make sure that we immerse ourselves into the storyline where Jesus is the ruling king, the person and the kingdom that gets our affections. And third, what is Jesus doing? He's presenting himself as the Passover lamb. If you read closely in Exodus 12, take a look there. Push pause and read Exodus 12. This is where the first Passover is described, that God is giving them instructions for the first Passover. On day 15, when the twilight happens on the 15th of the first month of Aviv, or Nisan, they are to sacrifice their Passover lamb. And Jesus comes into Jerusalem on day 10. You can see that on day 10, God instructs all of the people of Israel, the families, to find their Passover lamb and to take care of them until the 15th day. So we'll read this here. Exodus 12. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share one with their nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people there are. The animal you choose must be a year-old male without defect. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month. That's the Thursday, when all the members of the community must slaughter them at twilight. So the 10th day, if you chart this out, the 10th day, when Israel was to choose their Passover lambs, was Palm Sunday, the day where Jesus rode in and presenting himself as the Passover lamb for the people. So immersion in the storyline of God. Do you see what this feels like? It's like an embodied experience that we put ourselves through over and over and over again to keep our hope set into the true God. It's staying deeply in touch with the story of God on a regular basis. In this case, we put ourselves into the storyline every year. But immersing ourselves into the story of God can be a daily occurrence. The disciples, after Jesus resurrected from the dead, the early community after Jesus ascended into heaven, one of the things that they did, Luke tells us this in the Acts of the Apostles, tells us that they devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings, that is, devoted themselves to the way of God and the way of Jesus. You see that the word devotion there is an immersion kind of language. On a daily basis, they kept themselves inside the right storyline. But it's not just alone in a cognitive way. It's embedded in our community. This is part of the goodness of gathering together on Sunday mornings. This is part of what we do. Being immersed in the storyline of God isn't something that you can do on your own in an intellectual way only. You need a community of believers around you, and these practices to really keep our hearts oriented. But also being immersed in the stories and immersed in the promises of God is really a training in keeping our eyes open to the world around us and to the surprising and unsuspecting ways that God may choose to show up and work in our lives. And if you add all of this up, if you add a Holy Week up together into this kind of experience, it's all about helping us, helping Israel, helping the followers of Jesus stay in touch with the heart of the Father. Um, other than getting together on Sunday mornings for embodied worship, one of the most important pieces of being the church is gathering together nevertheless in spiritual conversation in live embodied ways. But right up after that, one of the most crucial pieces of church is keeping us oriented and immersed in the right storyline so that we can have our imaginations recaptured over and over and over again into God's story. Now, in the weeks and months ahead, again, I think that we have been given an unbelievable treasure, as dark and terrible as is the time that we're living through. We've been given a treasure to immerse ourselves into the story of God in ways that align with our experience. So I'm inviting you to explore this. Maybe you and your family need to get inside the story of Noah and his little family cooped up inside an ark for 40 days and 40 nights. Or maybe you need to get inside the story of David with him and his followers fleeing from Saul, living in caves, living off the land. Or maybe you need to find your way into the part of God's story where the people are taken away from the land and they no longer feel that they can worship because they don't have the temple anymore. Or maybe you need to get yourself into the story of Daniel in the lion's den, depending on who you're quarantined with. Maybe prayer is going to be your saving grace in this time. But whatever it is for you, I invite you to find your way to immerse yourself into the story of God in this particular week. Upcoming is a beautiful chance, an awesome chance to get ourselves into the story of the Passover once again and into the story of Jesus in the Last Supper. So one of the ways that we're going to do this year as a community, because I've been talking about an embodied experience, is that we're going to have an online immersive experience on Friday night for our Passover service. I'm going to put some details up here on the screen here to show you what's going to happen. What we're going to do is that we're going to gather on Friday night at 8:42 p.m., which is sundown on Friday evening at twilight. We're going to gather together in a large group Zoom call and do a time of breaking of bread together. So there's going to be 3 steps really to what we're doing. First, is beforehand. We've put posts, information in a post below about an optional Seder dinner that you can do with your family. We've given you some instructions on cooking, some instructions on a way to go through the service, the Psalms you need to read. And so that's not mandatory. Beforehand, before our Friday night twilight service, we've given you instructions with your family at home in quarantine to do an optional Seder. But after that, I invite you to get ready to jump into our communion service. So get some juice, get some bread, get some crackers and wine, or get some rice and water, whatever it is that you have. It doesn't matter at this point. Just get yourself something ready to take a small bite of with the whole community. Sign in at 8:30 p.m. where there'll be some soft music playing. Turn off the lights in your house, put a candle on. We're going to sing a song together, and I'm going to read the story again of Jesus' Last Supper and of his crucifixion from a children's Bible, and then we'll break bread together. All at once, we'll go through a little service where we'll do communion together as a community. We're going to sing one final song, and then I'll pray for you and give you a blessing. And then on Easter morning, we'll be back again, pre-recorded at 10:30. We have a great worship service that we're planning for you. We're going to upload that service online, and then we'll do our best to celebrate Easter once again, like the disciples huddled in an upper room not yet understanding completely what God was up to in their lives. So friends, I am praying for you today. I am praying that the God who raised Jesus is alive in you. I am praying that the Holy Spirit, the one who helped the disciples speak boldly, would encourage you this week. And I am praying that God may fill you with all the knowledge of his love and his will through the understanding that God's Spirit gives you. So be blessed. See you soon. Much love, Grassroots. Bye for now.